Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tips, tools, and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively. Welcome back, everyone. Today I have a special guest. I have Joy Uyeno. Joy is a writer, photographer, and host of the podcast mini-series, The Glimmering, where she shares real-life experiences to craft stories that demonstrate the magic at work in our everyday lives. Welcome, Joy. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
And I'm really excited about the topic of our show today. We're going to be talking about automatic writing, healing by connecting with spirit. And so many around the world are going through various stages of spiritual awakenings, and we are beginning to remember our unique gifts and abilities, and we're remembering them and we're beginning to share them out into the world. And so, I've shared my unique story several times on my show, but I love to have others come on and share their unique stories. So we're going to start off with Joy sharing her spiritual awakening story, and then we're going to dive into some of her unique abilities that she has been waking up to, and we're going to dive into automatic writing in this show. So Joy, could you start off by just sharing with us when you began to wake up to the illusion that we're living in and all of these awesome abilities that you're beginning to remember?
Yeah, so I grew up in Hawaii, and I feel like growing up in Hawaii, we're always connected to the spirit world. And so I had already sort of believed, but it wasn't until 2020, I'd had a relationship with someone for 18 years who I had a psychic connection with.
Wow, that's long.
It's a long time, but we hadn't talked in 8 years. And because there were a lot of things, it was a romantic relationship and we were trying to be disconnected. But while we were disconnected, there was still a psychic thing going on. And at the start of 2020, in the spring of 2020, it just got very loud. And I just kept getting all these messages to get in touch with him and to get in touch with him. And I was like, why?
And where was he? Was he living in another state at the time? Was he close?
I'm in Massachusetts now, and he was in Hawaii.
Oh, so pretty far then. That's
far away.
Time zone differences there.
Yeah. And I'm married. And so I just thought, what is going on here? And I did get in touch with him, and we got in touch with each other. And then about a week later, I was running in the forest and I lost my breath and I couldn't breathe. It was like June of 2020. And I thought, oh no, I was very convinced that I was supposed to get in touch with him because I was going to pass of COVID because it was so bad here. Yeah, it was really, I'm outside of Boston and we had the first super spreader event. So everyone was getting it. And I was like, oh, here it is. I think because I couldn't breathe all afternoon, but I got better over the course of the night. And when I woke up the next morning, I found out that was the time period when he had passed.
Oh my gosh. So you thought it was you, but it was him. That's how connected the two of you were.
Yes.
Whoa, I just got serious goosebumps.
Yeah. And so
I think, Joy, many of us are going through this where we have a connection with someone. We might be in a relationship at the time, and then we have a really deep, meaningful connection with someone else. And we're questioning that because this happened to me too about 10 years ago. And so it's like this deeper, meaningful soul connection. And, we can talk a little bit about that, but this is something that I am continually seeing, not just with myself and my guests, but also many of the people I work with as well. So this is interesting that we're talking about this topic today.
Yeah. I mean, it was a deep healing thing that needed to happen, but now I understand why it happened that way through my awakening. But what happened was a couple of weeks after he passed, I just very strongly felt like someone was telling me I needed to get in touch with a medium. And I did. And this medium never has opening. Like now that I know her, I don't know why there was an opening. And I just went on her website and booked an appointment, and he'd only been gone for a little, I think it might have even been 10 days. And he came through right away and had all kinds of things to say to me that no one else knew about our relationship, you
And
know.
when was the last time that you had physically spoken to him? It was right before he passed?
No, we had emailed each other
Okay.
right before he passed, like in the week, exactly a week before he passed, but we hadn't seen each other since 2011.
Oh, wow. So a significant amount of time had passed.
Yes. Um, and what had happened, one of the things that had happened, one of the messages I'd received that spring was that my parents had sent a box of things from Hawaii to my door. So I hadn't asked for it. It just showed up and it had a bunch of yearbooks and things like that in it. And also in there was this lavender journal that he had given me. I call him Jack to protect his privacy.
Yes.
Jack had given me. And when I had my mediumship reading with Carol Cottrell, the medium, one of the things she said was, "Oh, he's showing me this lavender journal. There's a big flower. Is it a lily drawn on the front?" He says to keep writing to him in that journal through automatic writing. So that was my introduction to automatic writing.
Whoa, that is powerful. That is so powerful. And, I worked in death and loss for nearly 20 years. So I was around people passing all the time. And I had many families that I worked with that said that they would sit down and feel this urge to write, and they didn't really understand why. And so I want to dive into this with you, Joy, because it's obvious that he was speaking with you between veils. Like he was obviously, wanting to connect with you. And these are ways that we can connect with our loved ones on the other side. But first, can you explain what automatic writing is for the listeners, so that way they're a little bit more in tune?
Yes. So I should clarify that when he said write to me in the journal through automatic writing, what he meant was write to me in the journal and I will write back through automatic writing. And so automatic writing is when it's a form of channeling. So you're receiving information and you're basically using your hand or your body as a vessel for the information that's coming through. And it's not just with loved ones, it can be with spirit guides or other energies. I have a kind of crazy story about the energy of money
Yes,
that I've
let's bring
connected
that up
with.
too. In automatic writing, I know I followed Wayne Dyer's work a lot. He's
Yeah.
a pretty popular writer, and he said that that's how most of his books were written, was through automatic writing. He'd wake up in the middle of the night and feel this massive urge to write things down. And so there is this kind of push from, whether it's our higher self, from our ancestors, from, whoever it may be, to sometimes sit down and write things out. And it seems like this was a very powerful tool that you could use. So can you share with us some of the things, that the correspondence that the two of you have had?
Yeah, well, I will say that I'm like I have a master's degree in writing. And so at first I just thought like, I'm a writer. Like, of course I'm going to be able to bring things through. I have a very strong imagination, And didn't totally believe it, but I started getting information. Like he would say things to me about people. Like I felt very lonely at the start of my in the first year of my spiritual awakening, and he would say, "Oh, don't worry, like we're working on it. Like we're going to bring people through." And then it would happen. Or he would say things to me about like things that were going to happen in my household, like um like like I started getting like weird things would start happening in my house. Like there were pots and pans that weren't on the counter at night when we went to sleep that were on the counter in the morning. He'd have told me about them. Or that he was going to send me like all of these pink roses, and then people started showing up with pink roses for me out of the blue.
Boy, he's active.
Yes.
He's pursuing you actively on the other side.
Yeah, it was making up for lost time.
That's cute.
So it was really amazing. And then I started to be able to connect. I had very strongly been told to write, like felt this very strong urge to write. I had given up sort of on writing fiction, but to write something about like people who have a psychic connection, like a story about that spring. And so I began writing that, and then realized that I have a writing spirit guide.
Yeah.
And she would write to me through automatic writing too. So it's been kind of just this amazing resource for me. And then the more validation I received, the more I was able to trust it.
Yeah. And so
So
when you receive the information, do you sit down and then set an intention and activate it, or does it just come through at random times, or both?
sometimes what happens is that, I mean, usually I have to sit down. I have like crazy monkey mind. Like I'm just like busy all the time. So I have to make time to sit down and say, okay, I'm writing now. But a lot of times I'll be doing other things and I'll receive information and I'll think, okay, I need to like sit down and do some automatic writing soon
Yeah.
because
And
someone has
mine comes
something
through
to
in the
say.
shower oftentimes. I don't know. It's with that water element. And so, like I was sharing with you before the show, my automatic writing it hasn't really come through in written English language. It's come through in symbols, in almost like Sanskrit or Hebrew. And I will write from right to left when I do it. So that's common in Hebrew language. And so I started when I was activated in my light language abilities. I first was activated in the written language of light language, and I didn't really know what it was. I was being woken up in the middle of the night. I was feeling goosebumps. I was feeling this massive surge of energy coming through me. And so I began every night to just leave a pen and paper out, on the table, because oftentimes it was almost like I was in a theta brainwave state. It was, you're in that hypnagogic state between I'm asleep and I'm awake. That's where I was. And so I'd wake up in the morning and be like, wow, I was, I recalled doing it, but I didn't really recall the details of it. I just remember
Yes.
getting up and writing. And so these were things that I was being, kind of communicated with from my higher self, is really what was coming through. And so there's different ways that automatic writing can come through, whether that's through, I had a guest on my show who did intuitive paintings, and so that information would come through to him. He'd know which color to pick, he'd know how to draw things out for people. And so it's really fascinating when we actually tune into that ability, how it can come through. Sometimes it can come through music or sound. I think Bach and some of the old composers would actually have automatic writing come through, and they'd start writing out musical notes and
Yeah.
sound.
I think they're always helping us to create things that are going to help with the right now. I feel like a lot of us are channeling information to help with this mass awakening that's happening
Uh-huh.
to raise the vibration. And so it's like it's coming out. Like if you look around, there's all of this stuff about spiritual awakenings and like popular music that's coming out. There are movies coming out. There's all of these podcasts and television shows. So I feel like a lot of us
It's no
are
secret.
no.
So Joy, you use this I'm assuming you went through some grief when you lost your friend. And so you used automatic writing as a form of therapy or as a form of healing. Can you share with us a little bit about how that transpired for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really, really deep grief process. I think it surprised everyone, including me, because we hadn't been in touch for so long, but because our souls were so strongly and are so strongly connected now, it felt like a part of me had died. And what was happening though, and now I understand, I mean, it was a several years long process, but I came to understand that everything had to happen this way. The kind of the tension, the difficulty of that relationship had to exist. That like 8 or 9 year gap where we weren't speaking had to exist for it to be that shocking. Because if it weren't that shocking, I wouldn't have gone through the awakening. And if I hadn't gone through the awakening, I couldn't, deliver this message to other people. But it was like a daily, like I mean, it was a deep grief process, but it took me, I started looking for ways to heal, and I tried like regular therapy, and the regular therapists were like, I think you're okay. And so I started doing like breath work and would have sort of channeling experiences in breath work. I started taking classes in mediumship. I started experimenting with flower essences, which I know you just did a show about.
I just posted a show yesterday. It's so funny. I made an essence today for money, and I want you to share your story on money, but I have been, it's funny how things will come back, and I'm sure this happens to you. It's like it bounces out and then it comes back. Flower essences haven't been on my radar for about 4 years, and boom, here they are. And now you just brought it up. So it's really funny.
Yeah.
how these, the things that we learn, we tune out for a little bit and then they come back into our reality.
Yeah. And every single step of this, I've been skeptical about it. Like I thought flower essences, like, what is that going to do? And then it worked so well. Yeah. I started working with them.
Powerful. It moved me across the country. I quit my job and started my own business. It's powerful.
So powerful. I started using the Lotus Way Joy juice, which is funny because my name is Joy. And I feel like it sounds like it's come out of my body.
What's the Lotus Way Joy juice? What is this?
Oh, it's a flower essence. It's an elixir. So it has like honey and stuff like that in it. And so it's a mix of flower essences and honey and a little bit of alcohol in it. I'm actually allergic. Like I don't drink, but I can do the 5 drops brandy. That I put on my tongue.
Brandy in
yeah.
It. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it just was a full game changer for me. Like I felt lighter and I could do things again. It was a really slow coming out of the grief. But we, my husband has been really amazing. And then he started receiving a lot of messages and, he got pulled along for this whole run. Did your husband
know him, Jack? Did your husband know Jack?
No. So I was in fact like, well, next time we go home, they should meet. Then I don't have to feel bad about this and it'll all be fine. And it never would have been fine. It never would have been fine. It was like one of the first things that Jack said when I had my first mediumship session. He was like, oh, I would have ruined your life. Like that was where I was going to go. That was my intention. And I believe that. I full on believe that. So it was, and then the automatic writing sort of walked me through it so that I was having, I didn't need a third party. I didn't need a medium all the time. Mm-hmm. I was having my own communication and then I was receiving my own validation through that.
It's like maybe you needed the medium just to kind of
open the door,
shake it up and open the door. And I think, that's what many of us are doing. I think even in my sessions with people, it's like, we all have the knowledge within inside of us, but sometimes we just need the key, it's like, okay, now that you have the key, you can open it up at any time, but it's just remembering that we have that ability within inside of us.
Yes. And then just to receive so much support from it, from my husband, but also the experiences that he's the whole final episode of my first series of my podcast. Cause that's everyone's first question is like, what does James think about this? But what had happened was, he started having these experiences. So like he went to the restroom one day and while he was in there in New England, our light switches are in the hallway for the bathroom. I don't know why. And he thought he said, Alexa, play the flash news briefing. And he thought I was flashing the lights on him. And I wasn't. It absolutely wasn't me. And then I had a mediumship reading after that. And like a week later, and she said, oh, your grandma and his grandma, your husband's grandma are in the house. And they've been trying to get him on board with your awakening. And they're flashing the lights on him. And I was like, oh, it's our grandma's. Okay, well, that's fine. So that
grandma shows up all the time. It's insane how much my grandma shows up.
Aren't you like
ladybugs in the middle of nowhere? And I'm like, grandma.
The grandmas really
they do. They want to connect. It's like grandmas are like, I even talked about this on a few of my shows. Grandmas don't mess around.
No. They were, in fact, the ones who were putting out the pots and pans because they were like, eat more protein.
They're watching us from the other side.
They're like, you don't know what you're doing.
They're like, raise your frequency so you can see us more.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I've talked about that. When we're in a state of grief, our emotions are on different frequencies and vibrations. And when oftentimes we're in that deep, heavy grief, we have a hard time connecting with our loved ones on the other side. We've got to kind of pull ourselves like an airplane up through the clouds until we can get to the blue sky. And then it's once we get to that blue sky, then we realize that we can have that connection with our loved ones, but it's hard for them to connect with us when we're in that deep, heavy grief.
Yes. And a lot of it came through music for me. So it's like, I mean, there are no coincidences, but there's no coincidence that it was like flower essences are about raising your vibration. Music is about raising your vibration. I was In fact, I went to get some like light healing done. And as soon as it was over, I walked out and the first song that started playing on my Pandora was called Frequency. Of course. Of course.
It's funny. And that happens to me too. And I'll hear that old song from the 80s or 90s. I saw the sign. Opened up my eyes. I saw the sign. Because I'll see the sign and then I shout out, all right, I see your sign. And then I'll hear that song play in my head. So it's really funny how I always joke that my higher self is like Bumblebee on Transformers because Bumblebee's the car that sings the songs. So
Yes.
they'll come through in a variety of ways. And it's usually pretty funny when it comes through.
And it's these songs that I never hear that song anywhere, right? And I get Higher Love, the Steve Winwood song, Higher Love, like everywhere I go. And everyone's like, it's Higher Love. Like,
you're like, that's an old song.
It's really old.
That's so funny. And so, okay, so I want to hear a little bit about when you grew up in Hawaii and the magic of Hawaii and that connection that you had when you were there, that connection that you lost when you moved out of Hawaii.
Yeah, so I grew up on Oahu, and growing up on Oahu, it's a very spiritual place because of the Hawaiian mythology, which is, not really mythology. So you grow up knowing people who have had these experiences where they've run into the goddess Pele or they've seen spirits. And I had seen a spirit driving over a gulch one day. It was like we were driving toward it and all of a sudden it was in front of us. And I was like, oh my God, we couldn't stop. And we drove right through it, and my friend and I were like, did you see that? Did you see that? And I'd heard night marchers.
That's cool. Mm-hmm.
We both saw it. Yeah. And I'd been on the beach once. Night marchers are the spirits of the Hawaiian warriors.
Oh, I've heard of them. Yes.
Yeah. So we were on the beach one night and I just heard this drumming and realized it wasn't like the bass of a car and realized it was coming closer and closer. And we were just like, run, so.
I've heard of that, especially in national parks. Like people will be out there and then they hear a drumming sound.
Yes.
I've heard that. I have very powerful clairaudience, the power to hear in other realms. And I'll hear that sometimes. I'm like, where is that angelic music coming from? Where are those drums coming from? And my friends are with me and they don't always hear it, but they'll feel it. They're like, why do I have goosebumps? And I'm like, something's here, so it's like we will sometimes coordinate together with each of our abilities as one. And then then I'm like, we need a seer in our group. We need someone who can see it because I can hear it. My one friend can feel it. And then it'd be nice to have someone who can actually see what we're experiencing.
Yes. Oh, those people are amazing. I'm so envious of people who can see.
I'm working on it every day. I'm working on it.
Well, I've been getting the information that we will, as our frequency collectively heightens, we'll be able to see more. So I'm excited about that. But
I'm excited about that too. And, and I think that's true. I think as we go through our awakening, there's certain abilities that turn on much easier than others, and my hearing was one. I didn't really realize I could hear, until it was funny. I went home to visit my family about 2 years ago. And one of my friends from elementary school said, I always remember you covering your ears and saying, it's too loud, be quiet. And I never understood why you were doing that because I didn't hear anything going on. So even as a child, obviously I was picking it up, but at some point I think I asked for the volume to be turned down. And now I understand I can turn the volume up and down, if I so choose.
I used to say to my parents, like they'd be talking about me in the other room, like, oh, she's so naughty or whatever. And I'd be like, I can hear you.
Yeah. So it's like we have these abilities as children, and you living in Hawaii, I'm sure it was just even more, powerful. And so, I had asked you about if you had had any past lives in Lemuria. And the reason why I had asked you that was mainly because Lemuria, you think of Lemuria, you think of Hawaii, and Lemuria, there was a Lemuria and Atlantis. And at this time, these were two huge continents. Lemuria was much more heart-based and loving, where Atlantis was much more technologically based and more in the mind. And so, many of us are beginning to wake up to these past lives of us living in Lemuria or Atlantis, and where I am a hybrid. So one of my parents was Atlantean and one was Lemurian. So I have a little bit of that heart and mind connection. And so many of us are starting to wake up to these abilities that we had. And when you think of Lemuria, you think of crystals, you think of sound healing, you think of all of this stuff that many of us are like ancient Egypt, that they were using to raise our frequency and raise our vibration. And, in my quantum healing session, sometimes I'll, guide people into their Lemurian lives, and I'll immediately I get emotional because I remember some of this too, because we're all connected and we all, have this. It's like one of my guests had explained, we're all like the mycelium of the mushroom, right? It's just this beautiful interconnectedness that's going on. And, as we work with one another, we meet one another, we activate one another, those abilities will strengthen and enhance. And that is so fun. So it makes me excited to think how many people out there will be activated to do automatic writing after the show. And so, Joy, if there's people out there that want to start doing automatic writing, what is some advice that you can share with them?
I think the most important part of automatic writing is to be open to it and to just know what Carol had said to me the first time she talked to me about it was you just have to trust, invite them in and say, I please use my body as a vessel for any messages that you want to deliver to me. And then let it go and don't second guess what you're writing and don't think too hard about it. You'll sort of, I feel like for me, the difference between my own writing and automatic writing that I know is that the tone is different, but also there's not like any crossing out. There's no stopping. It's just flowing out of me. And then a lot of times, like you, I won't really even know what I'm writing fully. Like I know I'm there, I'm present for it, but I have to go back and read it in order to receive the message.
Yeah, it's like almost like you take a step aside and then you allow that energy to come through you. And sometimes that happens with me channeling, it's like, I'm there, but I'm an observer. It's more like I'm kind of watching it. And then I've got to go back and re-listen. It's like, okay, that information was just as important for me as it was for whoever I was sharing it with.
Yes. And I had started doing work with a mediumship group, and I found that I could do it with their guides. So that was a very exciting moment, like realization to have, that it wasn't just my guides, but that I can connect with other people's as well.
And it's no coincidence that you're a writer. There's no coincidence that you went to school to be a writer, and now that is your vessel. And it's funny, I went to school for communication, and this is my vessel. I'm doing a podcast. I'm, kind of, doing things with my voice and speaking. So I do think it's actually really easy for us to figure out what our abilities are. It's just, what are you good at and what do you enjoy doing? But we make it so convoluted sometimes. And we're just like, well, what are our abilities? It's very simple. What are you good at and what do you enjoy doing? And then once you open yourself up to that, you'll be surprised at what comes through,
Absolutely.
And so I want to talk a little bit about community and, how we can establish more community when we're going through spiritual awakenings. Like you said, spiritual awakenings and dark nights of the soul can be extremely lonely and very isolating. And I think many have gone through this, whether I've gone through it several times. I kind of woke up back in 2010, fell back asleep a little bit, woke a little up again in 2015, fell back asleep a little bit, and then 2017 was like, no, it's time to stay, keep your eyes open, enhance your intuitive abilities. And then, so I think many will go through that process and you're like, oh, I don't know if I can trudge through it. I don't know if I want to stay awake to this. I don't know if I want to see through the illusion, to see through the veil. I think for me in 2010, I was working in death and loss and I was seeing shadow beings. I was seeing spirit. I was hearing spirit. It was too much for me. I was like, oh, I can't handle this right now. And I shut it all down and said, no, I'm not ready for this. And then 5 years passes and then I was a little ready, and then that's when I started kind of dabbling in Reiki and getting attuned and, taking the vital steps to raise my frequency. But I was doing this all by myself. I had no one to talk to. And it's really nice to see that there are more people that are trying to create community. But in your experience, what can you share about that? How can we create community when we're going through that awakening process?
So I love talking about the whole first series of my whole first season of my podcast is about this because I think it's so important. But I will say, I think when people wake up and fall asleep and wake up and fall asleep, your guides aren't gonna let it happen forever. They'll definitely like keep bringing it up until you
Yeah,
get
that was
the
my
message.
situation. I was stubborn.
Yeah, I think,
I'm an
and
Aries. I was stubborn.
I mean, luckily, we've awoken and like it was a brutal thing to go through, but I didn't have a near death experience, right? Like I feel like sometimes people have to get shaken awake. You get shaken awake.
Yes.
Like that's what it has to happen sometimes. And
if
so
you don't
for
do it
me,
naturally and gracefully, right?
right. Because I went through this period of being like, oh, I kind of like wish that I'd had a near death experience. And then I was like, oh, I got this message through automatic writing.
Near death experience. And because I thought the same. I thought maybe that's what I need. And then I ended up having one. I'm like, okay, I don't want to relive that again.
Yeah. They were like, this is it's the same thing. It's just a gentler approach to it. I was like, oh, okay. And that came through automatic writing. But I think my number one piece of advice for people who are seeking community around their spiritual awakenings, and what I tell people all the time, is just to ask your guides for help. So I I was in Carol Cottrell's class, and she had taken us on this journey to meet our guides. And I met this guide, and I said, I'm going to need I need some friends to talk to about this. Like my husband sort of on board, like human friends. And they showed me like a light bright, those light brights from childhood.
I love those. Light bright.
They said
every light shine real bright. I started a song on that one time.
I think I feel like whoever made that must have channeled it, because like it's such a good metaphor for who we are. And they said every little light bulb on this thing is someone that you know. And then every once in a while they'd sort of scan over it, and then one would light up. They were like, and this is someone in your life who's awakening. And so I had thought that I would meet like new people who would be my new spiritual.
No, these are the people you've known the whole time.
No, yeah, it was people. So I said, okay. And they said, we'll bring them to you. And one of them, I was in a workshop for an intuitive named Natalie Miles, and hundreds of people were there. And she said, everyone, can you type your name and your location into the chat box? And the first person who responded said, hi, I'm Maggie from Linfield. And Maggie and I had been friends when we were blogging, like in the early noughts. And I hadn't talked to her for years. And there she was. And we never talked about magic or psychic abilities or anything like that. And I was like, oh my God, Maggie.
You're like, let's go meet out in the woods. Come on, let's go. Let's go create some wind.
So we started talking. She was going through an awakening as well, like kind of like a second or third awakening as well. And then someone invited me to do like a small business mastermind. And in that group, there was this woman named Rosie, and I didn't feel like she was all that interested in the mastermind. But then eventually I started saying, oh, like Chani Nicholas says this on her about astrology, or, and she was fascinated. And I said, I'm reading this book called You Were Born for This by Chani Nicholas. She's like fascinated, and she wanted to know more. And then like we just started talking about all of the synchronicities we were seeing. And then,
Isn't it funny how you divinely connect like that? You could be going to something that you don't even want to go to, and then
exactly,
because that's how I met some of my friends. Is we all met. I kind of went because I thought it would be fun to go to this group about aliens. Well, he showed up because he thought it was about faith healing. He's like, I wouldn't have gone if I knew it was about aliens. Well, then we ended up connecting and having a great connection. And so it's kind of funny how we all are divinely guided based off of our frequency, really,
Yeah. I mean, one of the women she's the sort of peak climax of my podcast is this woman, Carrie. And I'd known her for a long time. We don't even really know, but we think from Instagram. And we had connected over the years, but her daughter had died 4 years earlier, 3 or 4 years before my awakening. And I witnessed that whole thing happen. But when her daughter passed, she had been hit by a car in a parking lot. And it had happened in this weird timing. So we were visiting La Jolla. She lives in La Jolla. We were visiting there in February or March of 2018. And had been staying right across, like randomly ended up staying across the street from the shopping center. We had a different hotel, and they were having a loud concert outside of it. So we got moved. And her daughter passed a month or two later in that shopping plaza. So I had always felt like there's some kind of strange connection here. And then when we started talking after Jack passed, we were on the same page about all of the things, So I feel like and then I just have clients who in the middle of my photo sessions would say like, well, the universe told me this. I'd be like, oh, we're the same.
Let me ask you this so you do photography as well. Do you see people's energy and aura in the photography? Is that something that you've developed?
I get a lot of orbs in my photography and things like that. And a lot of times what I'm finding, I don't see auras, but I have like a past life little girl who's around me all the time. And when I work with little girls, they always are like super excited about working with me. And I just did a session on Saturday. I had little boys on Saturday, and we were at the beach, and one of them, I knew that this little girl energy was going to be around and helping, and I was getting all of these numbers on the way up. We'd found a feather, that's her symbol. And the baby started kind of getting fussy, and I was like, oh no. And he starts looking up over my head and smiling, and there's like a seagull that's being sent like right over my head, just in time for us to like get this picture.
Oh.
Yeah, so I think that asking your guides for help, that you need to ask, and then they'll bring them to you, and you can, start building this foundational community.
Yeah, and being open to receiving too. I think, that was kind of a lesson that I've learned. It's like, okay, I've surrendered. I've done everything I can do here in the physical. I think even with my business, it's like, okay, I set up my website, I've set up my show, I've set up my YouTube, I've set up, different products, different sessions, whatnot. And you get to a point where you're like, okay, I surrender now. I hand this over to the universe to now take it and run with it, go with it. And so there's only so much that we can do here in the physical, but once we call upon assistance, then it makes it so much easier. It's like we are collaborating with the universe, right? It's like we don't have to be doing everything on our own. We have the energy of our higher self, our guidance team, all around us at every given moment. We just have to pick up the phone, give them a ring, and listen to what they have to say, right? It's just, It's like you're trying to connect with someone, but you're not calling them, and I think that's what many of us are doing. It's like, I can't hear from him. I don't know what's going on. Well, have you actually picked up picked up the phone and made a call and said, hey, I'm here. I'm ready to receive.
Yeah. Carrie actually talks a lot in her episode. So Carrie is my friend whose daughter passed, and she was a very fearful person before her awakening, and before Michaela started sending all of these signs and communicating. And now she's studying mediumship full time. Carrie is. And she said, I just think like I can just put it in a basket and let them take it away. That's all you could do.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I just heard, I think it was yesterday, someone said, go buy a really pretty box, a beautiful box, write down your intentions and put it in the box and let it go. Open that box up 6 months later and see what has transpired in your life, and you'll be surprised. And just, make the box pretty, something that you would honor and, and just make it worthwhile. But I love that. I think that's very true. It's like, just put it out there and it's like gardening, you put a seed in there and you don't every second, are you growing yet? Are you growing yet? Come on, no, you nurture it every little while, send it some love, give it some water, maybe a little fertilizer, but mostly you're just letting it be, and then eventually it will begin to grow.
Absolutely. And I think that it's like, you just need to, if you keep asking for validation, they'll keep sending it to you. So if you're getting nervous, you can say like, can you just send me a sign that this is in process? And then, oh my gosh, they'll send you signs. I asked for, my friend actually, Rosie, who's on the podcast, she asked for a sign of teddy bears to be told that, someone was coming into her life. And literally last weekend, she took a picture, someone was walking toward her with this life-size teddy bear. said, well, that's super clear.
That is. And I had a friend who she had lost her brother. And I said, well, what's a sign that you would know that your brother's here? I go, pick something random, like something random that you know won't be obvious. And she goes, how about like a bright orange butterfly, like bright orange butterfly. And so I was like, okay, with no black, just bright orange. And we're like, okay. So I'm thinking, I don't know if we'll see that or not, whatever. Well, we go about our day, we're shopping, we're out and about. Well, we get to this area in a store and there's all these handmade, drawn out, painted cards. And we see this bright orange butterfly. And I had to point it out to her because I was like, is this the butterfly that you were talking about? And she goes, that's exactly what I had visualized in my mind. And so I think, she was probably literally thinking we would see a real butterfly, fly by, but we ended up seeing a butterfly on a card. And so I think when we're looking for those signs, it can come in a variety of ways, right? It doesn't have to come in the literal way that we think it may come in.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, well, Joy, I want to talk about your podcast, The Glimmering. So can you share with us a little bit about your inspiration for the show and, what is the content?
So the podcast is a mini series. It's 6 episodes. This first season is 6 episodes, and it takes you through my awakening. The second episode. So each episode is about a person, and it takes you through an arc of their spiritual awakening and what they're doing today and how we're connected. So the through line is my grief story, and really my awakening story. So how my awakening brought me to each of these people and why. And the first episode is about me and Jack. The second episode is about Carol Cottrell, the medium, who is fascinating and amazing. The third episode is about my friend Maggie, she does inner soul, inner voice work. And she's doing a couple of workshops and things like that. And then in LA and Oregon. And then the fourth episode is about Carrie, whose daughter Michaela is amazing, but what was really, and this is sort of demonstrative of our relationship, was that she had told us that Michaela sends iridescent ribbons to them. So, like almost like Easter grass kind of ribbons. Mm-hmm. And she told us this, my husband and I, when we were visiting La Jolla, she was with her and her husband, Johnny, told us this. And no word of a lie, a week later, we're walking on a bike path in Kauai, which was where Jack had lived. And we're getting all of these signs. And I said, oh, the water's so beautiful. He said, it's iridescent, like Michaela's favorite color. And then he looked down and he goes, what's that? And it was an iridescent ribbon. And so she's been connecting all of these people through the podcast who have heard. And now I get these DMs all the time of people being like, I listened to the episode and then I found an iridescent ribbon.
That is so cool.
It's amazing. So that's her, my friend Rosie, who's become an energy healer, and she does work with flower essences. And then my husband, James, is the last one. And James's episode is sort of like everyone's favorite because he's the skeptic, but it just all these amazing things happen. So with James, actually, it's a storytelling podcast. So it's almost like if you think of like This American Life or something like that, where there's narrative built in with these interview portions. And it's really just their voices. My voice isn't in it in the interview part. Mm-hmm. But with my husband, I had a mediumship reading where Jack had told me that my husband's father was going to pass the next month. Oh. And he was very old. He was 88, but he was in fine health. And of course, within a month, he was gone. And during that, and he had said, it's really important. I'm telling you this, not because you need to tell your husband, but because this is his awakening. He's going to have these experiences. And sure enough, while my father-in-law was on his way out of this world, he had all kinds of, he was speaking to people which I know you're very familiar with, speaking to people no one else could see. And he was saying, no, I think I'm going to stay. I think I'm going to stay right here. And I was like, oh, they're talking to you. I don't know that you're going to have a choice. But
so he did. He stuck around. Audience is what it sounds like.
Yeah, he was very clear that someone was there talking to him. And then, and then at the very end, he was like, "Oh, hey, long time no see," like talking to his friends on the other side. And then he had my husband, like, I had no intention of him ever speaking to him. I was never going to push him into that, but he made an appointment for himself. And his dad came right through and had all of these things to say, and specific things about what my husband was doing while my father-in-law was basically, gone.
Mhm.
He knew he was on his left side. He knew he was holding his hand. He knew about the music that my husband had been playing for my mother-in-law all that time. Specifically, it was John Denver. And the
Country
medium.
road.
Yeah. And the weirdest thing was that she said, it's really weird, but I'll tell you, she's like, this is random, but I'll tell you what it sounds like. It sounds like John Denver. And from across the house, I just heard my husband shout, "Shut up." And so after that, every time we left the house, we would say, we play music for our dogs when we leave, because they're like hyper clairaudient.
No, I do that too. I've got frequencies on right now, so my cat will stay asleep while I do the show.
Yes, it's amazing. I mean, their frequencies are so high. So we would say, "Hey, Google, play John Mayer radio." They really like John Mayer radio. And after that happened with the medium, every time we said John Mayer radio, it would say, "Okay, playing John Denver radio."
No.
For a month.
Husband's dad.
Yeah, and we were like, wow, he's bossy.
He's bossy. Well, he knows that it'll make you laugh. You're like, I think once they know that we can receive the transmission that they're sending to us, then I think they get really excited about that on the other side. I can only imagine when my grandmother passed, I had gone home about a month after she had passed, and she had lived in this old farmhouse, it was one of the first homes built in the town, where I grew up, and very old farm home. And so I ended up staying there by myself, and I had a friend come into town who stayed with me later on, but he was clairvoyant and he could see people looking in the windows, and I wasn't sensing any of this. But one of the things I had talked to my grandmother about before she passed, because she was 91, so we knew it was coming, and I would joke with her, "How are you going to haunt me when you pass?" And she goes, "I'm going to make you laugh." Well, one of the things that she hated was iPhones. Like she she had a boyfriend, and I always called him Grandma's Dick. It was kind of like a joke because his name was Dick. And she'd be like, "Tanya," it was just this joke. Well, Dick got her an iPhone and got him an iPhone. He was on it all the time. Well, she hated it. She never used it. And I said, "Well, when you pass, I'll take your iPhone," because at the time it was a nice iPhone. Well, when I went home, all she did was mess with my iPhone. Like in the middle of the night, I still had Dick's phone number in my phone. He called himself in the middle of the night on my phone, which I had next to my bed, and I would play frequencies. Well, it stopped the music and called him on my cell phone. And I'm like, what? Like, it woke me up in the middle of the night, and they were just messing with me through the cell phone. And I could just hear giggles. I kept hearing my grandmother's laugh, like a cackly kind of giggle. And I had to get to a point. All right, guys, that's enough. You've got to let me sleep, mess with my phone in the daytime. Well, then they started sending text messages to strangers. And I'm like, what are you doing? So it was just this really funny thing that I knew they were making me laugh, and I was laughing because it was funny. But then it got to a point where I'm like, all right, it's time to give it a rest. Like, I can't keep explaining this to people. I don't understand how to tell other people that I didn't text them, So it just was funny how they communicate with us on the other side. And so they like electronics, and that's what it sounds like.
Love electronics. I had weird stuff happen with my phone in the beginning too. It was just like it would just light up like, someone was touching it, all the time. And I was like, oh, and then it would happen right before I'd go to I'd have a photo session, and then they tell me the baby was due to be born on Jack's birthday, or that their family was coming in from the same town that he was from, which is nowhere near here, so just like, it's amazing, the communication.
It is amazing. And so, can you share with us a little bit about some of the things that you're doing? I know that you're writing a book and, are there any other services that you provide?
Yeah, so I'm actually in the process of closing my photography business because to focus on writing and the podcast. So season 1 of my podcast is out now, and I'm currently working on season 2, which will come out in November, which everyone's like, that's so far from now. What's one fascinating thing is that I had been getting a song called I Want More for months before my podcast came out. And the day the podcast came out, I must have gotten 20 messages from people saying, I want more. And still, like to this day, people are messaging me, I want more. And so I'm like, okay, I'm working on it. But it's
like, okay, Stephanie Meyer. Like, I'm like, I gotta slow my roll here.
It's intense. It's a lot. So I'm currently working on I'm like finishing this week a rewrite for my novel, and publishing takes forever for those things to come out. So, but in the meantime, I'm on Instagram and I'm on TikTok as Joy Uyeno, Uyeno, and I was channeling collective spirit guide messages, but I've kind of put it on the side as I finish this rewrite, and I'll come back to it as things slow down a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny how I do that too. It's like I'm really into something and then it goes on the back burner for a little bit, and then I focus on something else. It goes on the back burner, but it's always there, but it'll circle back around when you're ready for it. And that's, it's funny because I started my book about 5 years ago when I was working in healthcare, and I started writing it as a form of, kind of healing for me. Then I stopped writing for 5 years, and then I recently picked it back up again. And it was funny to read through it because you can feel my emotion in it. You can feel where I was stressed and I was frustrated and all of this. And then now it's almost like, I think as the readers will go, once it's finalized, as the readers go through it, they're going to feel the energy through that book and feel the transition that I went through starting off, before my awakening, going through it, and then after. And so it's really interesting because I think many of us are being guided along that path. And writing is just an example of that. It's like, when you have that writer's block, there's a reason,
sometimes you have to put it down. Yeah, you have to put it down so that you can grow as a person. And then when you come back to it, it's like, you're like, oh, thank God I didn't pick this up a year ago. There's so much more to put in here, So I think it's always good to listen to that energetic guidance.
It really is. And so, Joy, this has been such a pleasurable show. I feel like we've shared a lot on a variety of different topics, from spiritual awakening to automatic writing and to about communicating with our loved ones on the other side. And so thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you for putting this energy out into the world and not being afraid to share your stories about automatic writing. I think sometimes when this happens, we want to get shy about it. We don't want to really share, hey, I can talk, I can talk to dead people, and I know that was in the beginning, but now it's like, I don't even care anymore. There's a lot of people out there who are doing this, and they're doing it in a variety of different ways than I'm doing it. So thank you for being transparent and vulnerable today. And I really
thank you
coming on the
thank
show.
you for having this podcast, because I think the more conversations people can hear about these things, the more comfortable they'll feel sharing it with other people. So I'm really appreciative of you.
Thank you. You deserve to navigate your life in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT tapping, and the emotion code, visit my website at www.theexistentialempath.com.